It's 11:30. You know what that means. Time to dive into all things people, power, and politics. This, my friends, is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. We have a lot of news involving the president and his push for mass deportations tonight, including a legal win involving that 1798 Alien Enemies Act that we've been talking about for a while. We're actually breaking down that decision with none other than our legal analyst. We're lucky to have Charlie Langton is at the desk with us here in Studio C in just a matter of a few minutes. And some of those deportation efforts impacting people who took part in those campus demonstrations last year protesting Israel's handling of the war with Hamas. A Jewish American and Arab American discussed the line between free speech and hate speech. But we begin with major news involving the Associated Press's fight with the Trump administration. A judge ordered the White House to restore full access to presidential events, saying the Trump administration violated free speech laws. The AP was barred because they won't follow the president's executive order renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. Now, that judge was appointed by President Trump. The White House did not immediately comment. Turning now to the trade war. The clock is ticking at this hour to the president's latest tariffs taking effect tomorrow, and that's just in a half hour. You see, there's a lot of uncertainty because the president has said while there could be permanent tariffs, he also left the door open for countries to try to make a deal. Meantime, the president's top trade rep was on Capitol Hill today, with lawmakers pressing him for answers as China threatens to slap retaliatory tariffs on our nation. Take a listen.
What's the status of discussions there? I don't see much progress.
They elected to announce retaliation. Other countries did not. Other countries signaled that they'd like to find a path forward on reciprocity. China has not said that, and we will see where that goes. I think we need to work with our closest friends to make sure that we have trading arrangements that work. And if the Chinese are open, we'll see what. But they haven't signaled that at all.
The president kind of saying both things, floating the idea, saying it could be permanent, could be something that we're using to get people to the table, and already some countries have come to the table. Staying on Capitol Hill at this hour, tariffs were really the talk of the day, once again for lawmakers, as they ran into reporters. But as you might expect, the concern level, well, it varied by the political party. That's as the White House made this call to other countries.
Countries around the world, bring us your best offers, and he will listen. Deals will only be made if they benefit American workers and address our nation's crippling trade deficits. America does not need other countries as much as other countries need us.
These tariffs do not liberate anyone from anything but the money in their bank accounts, and we need to stop making the cost of living higher for families who are already struggling.
Anytime you're going to have a change in the status quo, there's going to be some disruption by definition, but I think how this story ends is the most important thing, and hopefully it ends quickly.
Republican incompetence is crashing the economy with reckless tariffs and bleeding the accounts, the retirement accounts of Americans dry. We're watching global recession take hold because of the boneheaded policies of one person.
If you're paying attention to Wall Street, you're probably getting a little whiplash. It was a hot start to the day, but another disappointment to show you to end the day on Wall Street. You see over here, all three major indices were up at first, but now 300-plus point drops for the Dow and the NASDAQ, while the S&P 500 ended the day roughly 79. But some good news for the Trump administration, scoring a couple of legal victories to tell you about in our nation's highest court. You see, the Supreme Court blocking two orders stifling some of the Trump administration's biggest agenda items. We're going to begin with those mass firings in the federal government. You remember those? Well, the justices blocked a ruling ordering the administration to bring back thousands of workers who were let go. But stay with me here because things get a little bit dicey, a little complicated. You see, this order only applies to a ruling by a federal judge in California. There's a separate but similar case in Maryland federal court, which also resulted in a judge blocking the firings. Michigan signed on to that lawsuit. Now, that order still stands, but the DOJ is appealing it separately. In another ruling, the Supreme Court allows the Trump administration to deport Venezuelan migrants using that 1798 Alien Enemies Act. Now, here's the deal. We've covered that extensively here on The Pulse. It basically gives the president vast powers to imprison or deport non-citizens during a time of war. But obviously, the justices said the administration have to give the migrants a court hearing and give them reasonable time to go to court. The ruling was along party lines. It's the first time the 1798 Act has been used since World War II, which is the last time Congress actually declared war. That as the IRS agrees to share immigrants' tax data with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The reason? Well, according to documents signed by the Treasury and Homeland Security Secretaries, is to identify and deport people living in the U.S. illegally. The Treasury claims it'll help carry out the president's push to secure the country's borders. Advocates say it violates privacy laws. But back now to that immigration issue, specifically that 1798 law, because it sparked a lot of complicated legal questions, and we know there's one man up to clear it all up. Fox 2 anchor and attorney Charlie Langton in studio. See with us here tonight as usual. Charlie, thanks for staying up late with us as you wake up so early in the morning to do the radio and then TV for us, and then you come on the Pulse, so thank you for that. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rube.
1798. Last time this was used, World War II. Talk about this act, and does it surprise you that the Supreme Court ruled what they ruled today to essentially let the president use this?
It really doesn't surprise me. And it doesn't surprise me because let's change the facts. People don't really know about Venezuela necessarily and gangs, so that kind of gives it and these are citizens perhaps. So let's change the facts a little bit. Let's assume that there's a group of Hezbollah or Hamas people here in the United States, that their sole objective is to plot against the United States to do us wrong. Would there be any problem then in the president kicking these people out under this 1798 law? Probably not. So there's a little bit of politics going on here. There's a little bit of a PR issue here, I think. But again, watch what the Supreme Court said, the majority anyway. Yeah. You still have to give them notice. You still have to have a hearing. Due process is still alive and good in this country. And you still have to do it where the crime, alleged crime, is taking place.
So it's interesting because we've talked to Representative Dingell, Representative Haley Stevens.
They hate it.
Democrats.
They hate it.
Well, they may hate it, but they also say no one in this country wants their next door neighbors or people in their apartment complex or wherever to be gang members who are there to hurt their children or bring fentanyl in or to kill people or hurt people. I think everyone agrees that it's wrong to have people here illegally who are hurting other people. The question is due process. Do you think in this case, if this law, which it has, basically it's upheld, you can just say, okay, get out. What is the due process due for these folks who are in this country?
We get a judge. Hopefully you get an objective judge. Now, you're going to get a judge appointed by the president? Is the judge going to be not going to be objective? Are we going to say that the whole legal system is biased, skewed in favor of just kicking people out and just on a whim? I don't really think so. Listen, I understand. And what it does is this really creates a chilling effect on immigrants who are here. Some of them completely legal. I talked to people today, Wayne State University. 4 students were kicked out of Wayne State University. They were deported. I talked to Wayne States who are on a student visa pursuing their degree, one of them a PhD in English, and she's totally fine, totally legal in this country. Non-citizen with a student visa. She's worried about traveling. She's worried about maybe if she enters into some kind of a protest, will she be deported? Will her student visa be revoked? That's the chilling effect.
And there is a chilling effect, even though the 1798 Alien Enemies Act has nothing to do with the student visa issue. That's a totally separate thing.
Different issue.
But to your point, there's just kind of this overall overwhelm, I think, that people feel, especially when they're in those situations. Back to the 1798 Act, though, there is something that even Amy Coney Barrett, who, of course, is a Trump appointee of the Supreme Court, a very respected conservative, she even had a little bit of a dissent. She wrote that she was afraid that due process wouldn't be allowed for some of these folks. But they said now, the court did, you have to have something in place that gives these folks the right to appeal. Talk about that. What is that?
And the dissent, listen, she's conservative, so you think she's going to be the conservative. She's going to go with Trump. She didn't. But she did talk about due process. Yeah. That's the issue. Due process. You can't just go and do it. You can't just be a one-man wrecking crew. And I think that that's the reputation that, and in part because, Donald Trump is coming on very strong. We haven't had these type of aggressive prosecutions. Listen, I do think we need more judges, and I think there's going to be a clearer defined reason as to how you can stay in this country or not. You are granted a visa, so if you're not a citizen, you are here with privilege. So you have to follow the laws. And I think the problem here in this administration is that it's not clearly defined what can get you kicked out. Can I join a protest? Can I protest pro-Palestinian or pro-Israel? Can I do that if I'm not a citizen? I don't know the answer to that. That's for someone to decide.
I find that interesting because there's the 4 U of M students that they talked about. One of them, they said, had some kind of an infraction, and there were no charges filed. So Marco Rubio comes out and says, you can't just come to our country and go through the college campuses ripping them up with your opinion. But my question to you is this, from a legal standpoint, are people with visas given the same exact constitutional rights as citizens?
No, you're not. You are here with permission, so some of your rights do not apply
And
as
that's
a
where the
United States
discretion is,
citizen.
right? Yeah.
It is discretionary, but I think to say that due process, you're not going to get a fair trial. Yeah, I think is immature, actually. I think it's just feeding the frenzy of divide in the country. Yeah, we have to hope that our judiciary is not biased one way or another. Listen, are some judges lean one way and they're persuaded? Yes, but if you can listen, we got to find out what is the law. What do you have to do to violate it, and what do you have to do to not violate? That's what's not clear right now.
I may be asking the wrong guy this question because I know you have, ties to the justice system in America that are pretty deep. But I'm going to ask you a question. Are there liberal federal judges out there who are activist judges who are literally trying to rail against everything the president is doing? Because that's how Judge Boasberg in Washington was kind of depicted by the Trump administration. That this guy is out to get me and push everything away. Do you think that that's a thing?
Well, I think that's the criticism. I don't know. I think he's well-reasoned. I don't know him personally.
Of course, right.
I think, you get judges in just about every case. You can pick immigration, you can pick tort law, you can pick no-fault cases, you can pick anything you want, and there's a persuasion. Even our own Michigan Supreme Court, we have justices that are a little more pro-business, little justices that are a little more pro-individual. So
people come with their biases, right?
They come with their bias. So if that's the case, if you want to define that, then you're always going to say they're biased. I don't think so. I think it's well-reasoned, but what I do think we need clarification as to what's good and what's bad, what keeps you here and what doesn't.
It's so interesting that a lot of people out there who are on the liberal end of things will write to us and say all the guardrails are gone, when in fact you have federal judges, you have secretaries of state, you have attorneys general who are all there to say hold on, and they're trying their best to use their heavy hand to stop things from happening. It's interesting.
That's right.
Charlie, thanks for your time as usual. Great to see you here.
Good to see you.
I would say grab some coffee, actually get some sleep, right?
Get some sleep.
We'll see you tomorrow, my man.
Right.
We're turning the debate over to free speech on college campuses, and specifically on that visa issue with students, those 4 U of M students. What is going on here? We have 2 people who have very distinct opinions about this. That's next on The Pulse. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to dive deeper into the Trump administration pulling visas and green cards from college students across the country, Arab American news publisher Osama Sablani and Zionist Organization of America Michigan chapter board member Aaron Tobin. It's good to see you both. We're going to get to both of you in a second here. I want to share, as we always say, this show is about the people, right? So we want some of you to tell us what you think about what's going on. Those 4 international students getting their visas revoked. Here's what some of you told us. Look, Nick says each day that passes is becoming more difficult to love this country. Heartbreaking, disgusting. Kim writes in, it's getting to sound like pre-war Germany. There's so much distrust and negativity with this political climate. Paul says it is stifling freedom of speech. Doug says, I always think of it this way. If I'm a visitor in another country, the last thing I'm going to do is cause trouble. And finally, Kathy, we need to live and let live as long as not breaking the law. We thank all of you for writing in. Of course, so many of you have written to us. And now we have our 2 panelists to talk about what it is that we're seeing here. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to begin with you, Osama. When you first heard about these U of M students whose visas were being revoked, regardless of what side of the aisle those protesters, if they were protesting, were on, do you think that that was a good thing or a bad thing?
It's certainly a bad thing. When you start, stifling the debate, whether it's from students at the campus or people who are walking on the street or the highest officials in this country, you are going to start by stifling the debate there and then where it's going to end. They talk about hate speech, but I don't think the problem is only hate speech. It's speech that some people, some powerful people in this country, they hate. That's what it is.
So you're saying the administration is intolerant of the speech that's coming from some of these folks, and they're finding ways to say, just get out, is what your opinion is.
Like, this is unbelievable. What's happening right now is unbelievable. I don't think, I came into the country in 1976. On December 28th at 5:30, I landed in the country that I live in. It's a different country.
Aaron Tobin, is this a different country in a better or worse way than it was in 1976? In terms of freedom of speech, do you feel like these folks are being stifled, even if they be guests here in the U.S.?
So there's an old saying, you can't yell fire in a movie theater. Their freedom of speech isn't being stifled. Their hatred and activism
and endangering Jewish students on campus, destroying buildings, taking encampments, and telling professors where they can walk and where they can't walk. That's what's wrong, and that's why they're being deported.
But we don't know that. In fact, the 4 students, one of them was actually, we understand from the University of Michigan, basically had what they called infractions. There were no charges. They were all dropped, and the student was basically told that his visa was going to be taken away. Do you think that's fair?
They have the facts, they have the pictures, they have the videos of them protesting and aligning themselves with Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and promoting Hamas. Now,
you believe that all 4 of these students who were on that list at the University of Michigan and the ones at Central were all involved with protests?
I don't know the case, but I know they wouldn't do that at home. There's a man called Uday Rabi, a 22-year-old that was just killed in Gaza because he protested Hamas. Hamas found him, beat him to death, and dumped his dead body on his parents' front porch.
They killed 50,000 people.
So you're still promoting Hamas and saying that Hamas is the Palestinian people are now anti-Hamas.
Okay, well, Hamas is an excuse for people in here to say, well, if you support the Palestinians, then you must be supporting Hamas.
And you don't.
Of course I don't. I support Palestinians. The Palestinians have the right to self-determination, to their own country, to their own place, to where they are living right now. Donald Trump wants to take them out and have there an extravaganza, you know, for him and his guys. That is not going to happen.
Back to the visas for a moment, because these folks, even though when you revoke a visa, the person then, especially after the Supreme Court ruling today, said you have to give them due process to be able to appeal. Do you believe that if they had reason, good reason, if the State Department, the U.S. government had good reason,
if they go through the court,
can they do that, and then they can go to the court and try to appeal?
I believe that we have a country, a great country, that has rules and laws. And if the laws and the rules, the due process, prove that these people have done something wrong and they need to be deported, I support that. But what's happening right now is that a person in high office on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue making the decision on behalf of 35 million Americans, and that is not fair.
Aaron Tobin, if you find out later that the 4 students at the University of Michigan had their visas revoked simply because they had in the past voiced their upset at this country or about anything that was going on, do you believe that that is reason to have their visas revoked?
This is not that simple of a matter. These people were promoting an anti-American group and fundraising for them.
If they weren't doing that and they simply were expressing their thoughts, should they have their visas revoked, in your opinion?
It would be on a case-by-case issue, but this is not what's called a justiciable issue. When you have a green card, you don't have to make a crime. If the Justice Department, if Marco Rubio says that you are in violation of your green card, you're gone. There's no due process.
There's a due process.
It's Immigration and Naturalization Act 237. Look it up. All they have to do is fall afoul of what they believe is issued for the green card, and you're out. There's no trial.
People have had their visas revoked before the Trump administration. This has happened for many, many decades.
Yeah, but not in
the way you're saying.
And not the way it's happened. This is the United States, the greatest country on the face of this earth. We have Constitution, we have laws, we have rules, we have judges on every level, on the district level, on the appeal, on the Supreme Court, in every state, and the federal government. Why would someone make a decision to deport anyone who speaks against what we believe?
Do you regret?
Where do we stop?
Do you regret your decision not to support Kamala Harris because of what you're seeing unfold right now?
Of course not. Of course not, because Kamala Harris and Biden they participated in killing 49,000 Palestinians in Gaza. They could not find a solution. Now
that number is a lie.
Well, and even we're not going to debate the numbers here because
the United Nations, for God's sake, has confirmed this number.
They changed it.
Many
I think
people,
it's more than
many people have been killed. We know that's the case. Well, let's not argue numbers, but I do want to ask you one question.
One person is being killed is too many.
With 1 minute left, I want to ask you a question, because if you find out that some of these protesters, if we find out after this all comes out that they were pro-Palestinian but anti-Hamas, would you still feel the same way about their visas being revoked?
Listen, I have no problem with people saying my cousins are in Gaza, I'm pro-Palestinian, but that's not the fact. Gaza had Hamas repeatedly voted for, and the vast majority of people support Hamas. Now that they've actually woke up and smelled the coffee, they want Hamas out. They want to live their lives. People like Mr. Sablani should be out. His front page of his paper every day should be, Hamas needs to be destroyed and thrown out of Gaza.
I
don't see any
Netanyahu
protests.
should be in jail. That's what.
What's
that's
that
what,
have to do
that's
with
what
the
I'd
people?
like to say.
The people in Gaza want Hamas out.
Not in my opinion.
There's massive
in the opinion of
protests
the
now.
international
Massive
court
protests
that
against
he's a
Hamas.
criminal and he should be in jail. Before we talk about Hamas, let's talk about Netanyahu and his government.
They just had a beautiful conversation with President Trump.
There's a lot of condemnation and bluster.
Another criminal.
There's a lot of condemnation and bluster against both Netanyahu and, of course, against Hamas because of what's happened overseas. And you know what? Who suffers by that? The innocent people who are Israeli and who are Palestinian. And so, listen, we pray for peace in this world, and we know that justice starts here at home in this, the greatest country of the world. So let's hope that we continue to see that.
Let's hope that justice continues to be the case in here.
Osama,
that's not what I see right now.
I appreciate your time. Osama Sablani, Aaron Tobin, thank you both for the healthy debate here on The Pulse. We're getting you up to speed on some of the other big stories we're following after the break, including how some states are pushing back against the president dismantling DEI. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. It is people, power, and politics. Thanks for staying up late with us on Detroit's only nightly political talk show. We say it every day, but there's a lot going on in the world of politics. So let's try to fly through some of the other big stories that we're covering at this hour. Some Democratic cities and states are pushing back on the Trump administration's threats to cut school funding over DEI. State leaders in Minnesota and New York say they won't follow that order to get signatures from school systems certifying they're following civil rights laws, including rejecting what the feds call illegal DEI practices. Minnesota's education leader says the Trump administration overstepped, adding there's nothing illegal about DEI.